There we go. Okay, so first and foremost, let's pray. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, we thank you and we praise you. We can come together and study your word, Lord. And Father, I just ask that you just give clear understanding as to what's being said here, and that everything that I say would just be a blessing to people and would just not lead to more issues or questions or confusion or anything like that, Lord. I just pray that you speak through me and really, make it help for us to understand this chapter of the Bible, Lord. And we want to be able to understand all of your word, and so we try to, and we just ask, Lord, that you just work through us and work through me. And ask this in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're getting ready to go into the last 3 chapters of Revelation. And to be honest with you, with all the preparation and time and everything, I'm really kind of looking forward to getting to the very end of the book. Revelation has been the most challenging book that I have ever talked on out of the Bible. And, as I said in the beginning, some preachers have, after they've studied Revelation like this, they've actually left the ministry. Other preachers won't talk about this Bible because it is so confusing and stuff like that. I'm naive. I thought I could do a good job of it, but But anyway, so I hope you guys have learned something throughout all this. But I really, but in that vein, we're not going to get all the way through chapter 20 today. So I'm going to make up a chapter and a half next week, probably. I think I was looking at 21, and 21's, I think the last 2 are actually, there's not a lot of symbolism in them. There's just kind of straightforward. So I'm thinking I can get through the last, I think I can do a chapter and a half next week and get through that. So that's what we're going to shoot for. So we can still be done on the 18th, and then and then come in at the new year talking about some other things. So, but we will see. We'll see how that goes. So, okay. All right. So chapter 20. We're going to do verses 1 through 10 today. All right. So. As I said, we're not going to get through the whole chapter, because we're part of this. We're also going to be looking at some Old Testament verses today too. A lot of Revelation, and I haven't delved into it because I didn't want to be jumping around and stuff too much. But there is a lot of Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, Isaiah, a lot of the prophets in the Old Testament. Some of what they were talking about is believed to be this. We know for certain that Daniel talked about the end days. There's also in Ezekiel, we'll talk about a passage in Ezekiel today that will talk about the end days. And so I'm going to give some of those passages to you. I'm going to encourage you, if you want to dig deeper into this, to go ahead and look at those, and it'll talk about some of the things. Some point in time when I feel brave, I might try to tackle those books, but I'm not feeling so brave right now. And we're going to, So I don't know where we're going next, but got some ideas, and we'll see. So we'll see where the Lord leads. But anyway, so chapter 20, we finished up last week with Christ's arrival on the earth. He came back, and the beast and the false prophet were defeated, and they were thrown into the lake of fire. So they're the first 2 beings, people, whatever you want to say, in the lake of fire. And so, as one person put it, as one Bible teacher put it this week that I was watching, he said, "There's a Bible trivia thing for you. If you really want to stump somebody up, ask who's the first people in the lake of fire." And they'll say, "Oh, Satan." No, it's not Satan. Satan's not there yet. We're getting ready to see. It's the beast and the false prophet from the tribulation. So the Antichrist and the false prophet. So, all right. So we're going to start out with verses. What do I want to do here? I know I don't want to do all. I don't think I want to do all 10. No. I want to do 1 through 1 through 3, right to start with. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he was cast into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should not deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. Okay? So, see, right out the gate is where we start. Satan, the first thing that happens here we see is, the false prophet and the Antichrist were, in the last chapter, were defeated and thrown into the lake of fire. And this chapter starts out with then. So this is immediately following that event. Satan is grabbed, he's bound, he's chained, he's bound, he's put into the abyss with his demons, his legion of demons. This is the same abyss that, do you remember the demons that were released from an abyss and were like horse heads and stuff like that, and were out biting the unbelievers, the people that didn't have the mark of God? This is the same pit. He's going back, they're going back in. And so, but this is, and they're going to be there for 1,000 years. Okay? And so he'll be, and we're going to discuss the 1,000-year period more in a few minutes. But, so we need, and so that's kind of where this is, this starts out right here, and he's bound and defeated, and, sounds like he's already defeated. They just need to chain him up and throw him in the pit and be done with it for, so, and so then, like I said, we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But verses 4 through 6. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who were beheaded for their witness to Jesus and the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, or had received the mark on his forehead or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Okay, so here we see 1,000 years again. All right. David speaks about this. As I said, we're going to look at some Old Testament stuff today. David talks about this in Psalms chapter 2. He says, chapter 2, verses 7 to 9, I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them into pieces like a potter's vessel. So this is basically, David's basically saying that what's going to happen at the end is Christ is going to come, and he's going to rule on the earth, and with an iron rod, a rod of iron. And we saw this in one of the letters to the churches at the beginning of this book. I can't remember which one at the moment, and I didn't go look it up, so I apologize for that. But where he said, he told the people that were faithful that they would get to rule with him in the end days. And so they're gonna rule for 1,000 years. He's gonna rule for 1,000 years on the earth with, and these thrones are set up. And it says in here that the people that were martyred during the tribulation, that did not worship the beast or take the mark, that they will reign with him. Okay? Here's where we start to get into controversy. Some people believe that those are the only ones that are going to be there at this time. Most believe that when he talks about the first resurrection here, that those are any believer that has gone on before them. It has passed, that their souls are in heaven, their bodies are in the earth, they're going to be the resurrection, their body's going to be raised up, they're going to be rejoined or have a glorified body at that point. But there'll be a resurrection of the body with the soul, and it'll be rejoined and transformed into a glorified body, and that all of the believers will be there, ruling over during this time. Okay? So that leads to some question as to who they're gonna who are they gonna reign? If everybody is a believer, who are they gonna reign over? Well, one question I had about, is I even expressed to Pastor Steve that I have a hard time with this passage and stuff. So, and there's from what I'm reading, and I read behind, just so we can throw out some names so I'm not plagiarizing, I read behind Tim LaHaye this week. I've been reading behind him a lot, throughout this whole thing, but I pulled a lot from him this week, from his Revelation Unveiled. Warren Wiersbe, who's a pastor, they call him the pastor to the pastors. He's like giving information for a lot of pastors and stuff, and I read behind him this week, and there's some others. Those are the main. They're not the main. John Woolward, who was at Dallas Theological Seminary at one point. I studied a lot behind him, and to be honest with you, the more I studied, the more it didn't help. So, and I looked at some other people that have some stuff online that kind of have similar viewpoints and things like that, and kind of to try to understand these viewpoints better. But LaHaye, Wiersbe, Woolward, all of them talk about all these viewpoints, and they at the end will talk about which one they kind of feel it is, but they present all three of these viewpoints that we're getting ready to talk about. And so, that's why I think I don't know. So, but anyway, so we'll see here that Christ is coming back, and he will be the people will be ruling on the earth. Okay, in Luke 19:21, 11 through 22, there's a parable talking about the servants and how they were given talents, and then when the master came back, he asked them what they did with their talents and stuff, and to give an account for what they did. And one guy had 10 talents, he multiplied it, got 20. So that the master said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You will be ruler over 10 cities." And then another guy had 5 talents, and he doubled it and got 10 talents. And then the master said, "Well done, good and faithful. You will be ruler over 5 cities." And then there was another guy that didn't do anything with his talents, with the talent he was given, and he just held on to it because he was afraid of losing it. And that, and the master said, "Why didn't you do something with it? You could have at least put it in a bank and done something." And that parable speaks about spiritual gifts and how we're given, each person is given spiritual gifts as a believer, and we're called to use those gifts for the kingdom and be out there witnessing and doing what we can. And that's one guy I saw online this week I talked about, and I can't think of his name right now, but he was talking a lot about, and he opened up, I saw a video on him, and he opened it up by basically saying that he was studying this chapter, but he wasn't ready to talk about it yet. So, and that he brought forth the same kind of, the same beliefs as well, with a little variation of it and stuff. But he also talked about how we should be using our spiritual gifts and putting on the full armor of God and going into battle every day and trying to, because, as we see here, if we're looking at this as a very literal interpretation, that they will be ruling, that the believers will be ruling over all the people on the earth. Some will have 10 cities, some will have 5 cities, based, kind of is the idea of the parable goes. The more you've done with the gifts that God has given you, the more that you will get. So, the more the responsibility that you will get in the millennial age. So, okay, but this is a very literal. The first one is a very literal belief that this is going to happen. It's going to be 1,000 years, no question about it. Total of 1,000 years, and the believers are going to rule on the earth with Jesus during this time, and it'll be should be pretty close to a utopian society, a perfect society, and that God is basically is very similar to what the Garden of Eden was supposed to be. Okay, LaHaye talks about how the earth will be transformed by fire. That one of the last judgments we saw was the leveling of mountains and the wiping out of the oceans and stuff, and that there'll be, and someplace in here it talks of a little bit later on in 21, it talks about there being no seas anymore, that there's no oceans anymore, when new heaven and a new earth are created in the next chapter. But there's and so we'll see that as well. But LaHaye speaks that the earth is going to be by fire. That it'll be before we go into the 1,000 years when Christ comes back, that he'll be he gets that, and I can't remember, and I didn't put it in, but he does. There's a passage in one of the prophets that talks about that, and he believes that he's talking about at the end when that happens, and so I'll have that for you next week. I apologize about that, this is called the premillennialism view, premillennial view. Okay, where Christ comes back before the millennium, and then he sets up his kingdom on earth, a very literal kingdom, like I said, 1,000-year period, and the believers are going to rule with him. And then after that, now don't get hung up on this. Even with the literal 1,000-year period, when Christ comes back, he is ruling forever and ever. It's not just 1,000 years and then he stops. No, he's going to rule forever and ever. Okay, but there's 1,000 years set aside on this literal view of this, and and he talks about, because we see it here twice. Satan must be bound for 1,000 years. After that, he's released for a little while. And then at the end of verse 6, and he shall reign with him, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years. So, by my account, if it's a very little thing, then the believers are going to rule for 1,000 years with Christ. But then after that, when the new heaven and the new earth come down and everything else, that we won't be ruling with him anymore. It'll be Christ and God, and that we won't have that responsibility anymore. Okay, so people believe that, and Tim LaHaye believes that and we're going to talk a little more about that here in a few minutes, but that people that are alive during that time period that if they're believers, they will not die. They will not taste death. They will stay until the very end of the 1,000-year period. If they are believers, we'll see a verse here. We'll see a passage here in a little bit that talks about something about 100 years. He believes that they're going to die on their 100th birthday if they're not a believer. They will have had 100 years to be. And so, like I say, we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But let me talk about these other two views real quick. Another view is the amillennialism view. And this is viewed as a spiritual view. That it began at the cross. That Satan was bound with Jesus' work on the cross and resurrection from the grave. And that Satan has been bound since then. It's not a literal 1,000 years. It is just a long period of time. And we see that many other times in the Revelation and throughout the Bible, where it's a reference of a certain number of years references a period of time. And so this view takes it that it's a long period of time. Okay, this view was first brought about by Augustine back in the back in the early centuries. I thought I put the century in here, but yeah. And then Martin Luther also, because he studied under Augustine in some ways and studied behind Augustine, that he was a proponent of his view as well. But it talks about that Satan is bound in the hearts of the believers Yet if you're a believer in God, you've accepted the gift of salvation, that Satan is bound. And that you will go through life and that Satan is bound, and that while he may be doing other things on the earth, that this is just a spiritual thing. It's the binding of Satan in the believer's spiritual life. Okay? And which would also lead to the fact that once you accept Christ and you're genuinely saved, that you can't, as it says, you can't be taken out of God's hand at that point. The belief that you can't lose your salvation kind of goes along with this too. That because you've accepted Christ and His work on the cross, that Satan can't touch you spiritually. Okay, now he can torment you mercilessly, like he did Job, and as he does all of us. We all deal with Satan on some level. So, and actually, as I was just talking about that, actually kind of made a little more sense to me. I studied this for hours yesterday, it didn't make no sense, but, I can kind of see this view a little more now, that this is just a spiritual thing, that while Satan does still attack us and tempt us and everything else, we can't be taken out of Christ's hands. We are still spiritually connected to Christ, and that Satan is bound and can no longer harm us spiritually and cause us to go to hell. So, but he does want to destroy everything else about us if he can do it. And that's what this view holds. And it'll be, and it will continue until the second coming of Christ. And that when Christ does come for a second time, there will be no 1,000-year millennial literal period of time that it was placed here in this portion of the Bible to talk about. At this point, I honestly don't know why it would have been placed here in this, in John's letter, but it was talking about the binding of Satan, and like I said, there's stuff here that I can't fully explain. So, but that's the view here on this. This was really popular. It still is popular in some people today. There is a lot out there about this one, and could be. We see a lot of symbolism and a lot of other stuff in the book of Revelation. So this could be it could be a spiritual binding, that we are, protected from losing our faith and our salvation to Satan. So, okay, I'm going to go out here on a limb, but is there any questions so far?
Okay. I held with the first view where it says Satan is bound and locked into the abyss. Is the abyss the same thing as the bottomless pit, as you stated? And is that bottomless pit in the middle of the lake of fire?
It's not in the middle of the lake of fire, no, because he gets thrown into the lake of fire here shortly. He's not in there yet. This is a separate place. This is just this is a holding kind of area that he'll be for 1,000 years. After that 1,000-year reign, as we'll see here in a minute, he will be loosed according to the scriptures, and he will be able to go out and to deceive nations and to deceive people, and then his rebellion will be, he'll form a rebellion, the rebellion will be crushed, and then he will be thrown in the lake of fire at that point, never to be heard from again. So no, it's not in, this is a place, right now there's demons locked in this abyss. There's the ones that were the worst that really rebelled against God and did a lot of the stuff in Genesis that was talked about as far as trying to populate with the human women and stuff like that. It's believed. It's one belief. There are others, but there's and Peter, 1st or 2nd Peter, he talks about how there is some are bound now and are in a holding, are awaiting final judgment at that point. And so even Peter speaks of that. And so this is the same abyss. And this is where the angel went down and released, and for one of the judgments that we saw, and they came out and they attacked the people that were worshiping the beast. So, okay, is that a little better?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so third view. Any other questions? Good. Okay. Okay. The third view is post-millennial, millennialism, or whatever you want to say. This one was popular starting in the 16th century, or the 1600s.
Maybe 17th century.
Okay, 17th century, by Daniel Whitby. He brought forth this, and then he was kind of brought out as a heretic, and a lot of his teachings were proven to be false or whatever, but this one gained ground. A lot of people thought that this was a plausible thing, and that what it is that the view is that the world is going to get better as we go forward and spread the gospel more and more throughout the world. Okay? This was popular until the mid-1900s. And as some of the commentators pointed out, a couple of world wars and a Great Depression really kind of put that to bed. The world's not getting better. The evil and moral decline of people throughout the world is just, kind of puts this to rest. This is not viewed that much anymore. There's very little support for this now. I'm sure that there are some people that still maybe adhere to this, that, and we all want the world to be a better place, but we also know that it's not going in that way right now. So, okay. But yeah, this is the third view. So, and a lot of all the commentators talk about these three views, and they each have their own. The majority of them are okay. Where's the rest of it? Okay. The majority of them are pre-millennial. There are some that do subscribe to the amillennial. It's a spiritual thing. And most of them do subscribe to the literal thing. So, based on the literal, and that's kind of how we're going to look at the rest of the section here today, 7 through 10. But first of all, let me just say this, okay? This is not a salvation issue. We should not be arguing in the church about this. This should not be causing problems amongst the fellow believers, okay? As we've talked about with many things in the Bible, there are different viewpoints, different interpretations, okay? And sometimes that leads to arguments and splits and divisiveness and stuff, and that's just the devil working to try to destroy any witness we have. And so we need to not let these things be that kind of a thing. Okay, this is not a salvation issue. Doesn't matter what your belief is on what's going to happen in the end. As long as you believe in Christ and have accepted the gift of salvation and follow Him, then it's not a big deal. Okay?
Amen.
So. All right, some old passages. If you want to write these down, I'm not going to go into them. But if you want to write these down, a couple of passages here. Daniel 2:31 through 35 tells us about the kingdoms of the world being destroyed. Kind of similar to what David was talking about in Psalms 2. So that's Daniel 2:31 through 35. And then Ezekiel. I said that there was a bunch in Ezekiel. Ezekiel's chapters 36 through 48. So if you really want to dig deep, there's 12 chapters you can dig into. And that talks, and I've looked at some of that over the course of studying this. It talks about a lot of what we're talking about in Revelation. Gives a different. I kept talking about the where the Antichrist goes into the temple that's rebuilt in Jerusalem. That's in, I believe, either here or one of the prophets. That's one. But I think it's in Ezekiel where he talks about that. But Ezekiel goes into a lot of depth about what worship will be like in the millennial time and after and stuff. And so these are some good things. Also, one other one I didn't put up there is Zechariah, chapter 14, verse 8, and then verses 16 through 21 talks about the kingdom being established at the end. So again, that's Zechariah chapter 14, verse 8, and then 16 through 21. So if you want to dig a little deeper, there's some verses for you to go with. And, you know, hope that God shows you some things through those. Okay? So, any questions? All right. So now we're going to look at verses 7. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Now we're going to look at verses 7 through 10. Now, when 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is the sand of the sea. They set up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are. And they were tormented day and night forever and ever. All right? So, what we're going to see here, Isaiah 65:20, talks about heaven and the millennial reign, that there shall be no more shall an infant from there live but a few days, nor an old man who has not fulfilled his days, but the child shall die 100 years old. But the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. Okay, this is where we get the 100 years. Tim LaHaye believes that right on their 100th birthday, because he says that their sinner's going to be 100, at 100 years they'll be accursed. And so a child will be born and will be guaranteed at least 100 years during the millennial. If they don't accept Christ, then they will die at some point, is what's being said here. If they do accept Christ, they will continue to live on until the end of the millennial. Now those born in between 900 years and 1,000 years of this literal millennial will not live to be 100 years old, obviously, before the millennial is up. Okay, so, but otherwise everybody else. And so during this revolt that Satan's going to do is going to be kind of like a lot of young people, because all the others will have died out at 100 years of age, is the belief that LaHaye has, and kind of see that here, you know, where he talks for a child shall die 100 years old at least, but and stuff. And so, you know, and the ones that Satan's going to gather now, why he's loosed, most people believe that he's loosed to show that even in a perfect utopian society, or as close as we're going to get to it, that man's heart is so decadent that they'll still rebel against God. I thought we proved that in the Garden of Eden. But apparently, most scholars believe that this is going to be, you know, proving again, after all this, all of human history and everything, and all of these prophecies come true and everything, that this is what's going to happen. Okay? Not all people in the millennium will be believers. So that's what the common belief is. So the ones that the believers will rule over will be everybody, and there'll be some non-believers there as well. Okay? There'll be people, as one commentator described it, that will be kind of just going through the motions. They'll be faking worship just to go through the motions or whatever, but in their heart of hearts, they will really be against God. So we have that today in our church pews. We have people that sit in our church pews every week. I'm not specifically saying here, but throughout the world, that sit in a church every week and really they're just there to check off a box or to think that they're going to get to heaven because I attended church. Okay? That's not the way it works. And so we will see that will be going on in the millennium too. Okay? And so obviously it's not going to be a total perfect society, because there's going to be, you know, you got to have rulers over the people. So there could be, I don't know. I don't understand fully how people are going to, in their hearts, be so willing to rebel when Satan's not there to tempt them, you know. And so it's, without Satan's outside influence, the only other temptation comes from our mind itself and whatever and stuff, but a lot of that is fueled by Satan. And so this is where I get confused on things. And so this is where I don't fully understand, but I'm just trying to relay what a lot of the commentators are saying. And it seems to be an agreement amongst them all. Okay? Some people, like I say, some people will not be happy. They will follow Satan into a rebellion against God. And that will not last long at all. As we see, fire, God's going to take care of it in one foul swoop. They're going to gather together. They're going to surround the city of Jerusalem, where God will set up Jesus will set up his kingdom. And fire will come down from heaven and consume them all. Kill them all. And then Satan will be bound and thrown into the lake of fire at that point. Okay? And he's not the last one to be thrown into the lake of fire at this point. And we will see next week more about that. Okay? And as I said, I struggle with the reason why Satan is released. I still struggle with it. You got your enemy defeated, bound, and why release them? And so I don't, and so that's where maybe some of the, maybe the fact that it's not a literal thing and that it's a spiritual thing, maybe that gives more credence to that. I don't know. The timeline for the spiritual part of it, being that it's in the hearts of the believers, and that, Satan can't take us away from him, away from God. Maybe that kind of more aligns. I don't know. So, again, I don't know. I don't have the answer on that. And whatever I've read is kind of, this is the general belief, is that this is going to happen, literally going to happen, so that it can be proven that man's heart is so wicked that we have a rebellion again. And, so if it happens if it's in the spiritual sense, I don't, other than that Satan is coming at and attacking, God all the time or us, and just not in the spiritual sense, that in every other, physical and whatever other ways, then, that, I don't know.
Bruce,
Yes.
maybe God has sent Satan to see if the people who say that they believe in him really and truly believes in him. Because if they do, then Satan can't touch him.
Well, true, but
I could be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking.
He's
and
released
it's
for a season. They said he's released for a season.
Yeah.
We don't know how long the
Yeah.
season
no, we don't know how
is.
long the season is.
And he
but-
goes out to deceive.
right.
And so, like she said, this is like the last test that God has
Yeah.
given to see who really are his.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
and that could be too. Who are going to remain faithful? to
It's
that.
just like
Also,
the,
you're unfaithful,
the
like
flood
I mean,
wiped
you're
out
vulnerable
everybody.
enough to
Yeah.
believe so
That was a
that's
judgment of God, and only eight
Yeah.
survived, but
Right.
look what happened there.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
You have
So
a subconscious mind. You don't know what's in it.
Mhm.
You could say that you're a believer. Satan can come back and it could be in your subconscious that God is a lie.
right.
Satan is the truth.
Yeah.
Then it would come out, so your subconscious could be holding all the answers
And that
at
could,
that time.
yeah, that could be part of all this. And
I mean, it could be it could be the biggest believer, pastor, anything else. But in the subconscious, no.
It could very well
So you
be.
don't know who's going to be where.
Yeah. If and it's a matter of heart, and it's a matter of are you committed to God? Are you committed to
That's
what He's done in your life, and what He's done for you, and what He's calling you to do for Him? Are you committed to that? He's called every one of us to do something. Okay. Not everybody's being called to go on the mission field overseas. Not everybody's being called to be a preacher. But we are called to be evangelists in our own sphere of influence around us.
right.
And do we want to see anybody have to go through this? Bear that in mind as you're talking to people. The biggest thing that we are to be doing, the Great Commission, the biggest thing that we are to be doing is to be evangelizing to the nations, spreading the word, telling people that we know, living the example of the life that God wants us to live for these people. Even if we're not talking to people all the time about God, and sometimes that alienates a lot of people when I feel like you're cramming God down their throat, but if you just live as best you can for God and you live differently than everybody else out here in the world, your motives and everything else are different, then people are going to notice. They're going to want to come. In some ways, they'll come to you and ask what you're doing, or they'll figure it out for themselves. And that's a lot of times that's your greatest witness. Yes, we are called to talk and they're called to speak about God, and that's where we need to be prepared and we need to be studied. And so, but we bear in mind that we don't want to see anybody willing to go into form a rebellion with Satan. If this literally happened, or go and join up with Satan now and rebel against, if it's the spiritual aspect of it. So, but yeah, that's very plausible. So, anything else?